And I think it's a good example of sometimes you can find a real gap in the market in something that is like very niche. Like it would never become a $1 billion company, obviously.
Lior Grossman, thank you
Yeah.
for joining me on 20 Minute Leaders. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very, very much for being here all the way from sunny California to the dark and stormy Tel Aviv. It's interchanging and both places have wonderful weather. Lior, an expert in open source. I think you founded like 5 or 6 companies in this world, and it's unbelievable. Not all of them in this world, but I know that that's what Openbase is about, and some of the others like Wikiwand and something like that. But I would love to first hear about your journey, hear about who you are, starting all the way back when you built your own computer within your car. And I have to say that when I buy a car, the first thing that I look at is the multimedia screen, and you actually built one for yourself. So tell me about that.
Right. That's a crazy story, actually. So my first car, it was a blue Peugeot 106, kind of like, I think it was like the 97 model. And back then in the days, like it's a really old car. It didn't have any kind of like multimedia system. And being the computer geek that I am, I decided to do something about it. So I ended up actually building a personal computer that sits in the trunk of the car. It's connected like through cables or that run all through the car. And I ordered a touchscreen. A touchscreen was like a thing like back then, like in the early 2000s. So I actually had to order one from eBay, got it all the way, built it into the dashboard of the car. And basically, every time I would start the car, it would start a personal computer sitting in the trunk. It would have multimedia, it would have music, it would have Wi-Fi, everything. This was kind of a very crazy hobby project, I would say.
Unbelievable. I love those types of projects. It's really amazing. Tell me a little bit about your startup journey. I know that you were a team leader in one of the lead units in the IDF, and then you go and you build a massive portfolio of companies, each of them in a different space, all of them making a huge impact. Walk me through some of them before we reach Openbase and the open source industry.
Sure. So I've been, I would say, a late bloomer as an entrepreneur. So I think, I would say my focus has been mostly on entrepreneurship for the past decade or so, but,
Wow.
God, I'm old. Um, so basically, I got into entrepreneurship by building my own software development firm. So around 2007, I started my own software development firm. It was called Openbase. I've been working with wonderful, wonderful clients, most of them small startups, and I help them get to market with their products. And this has revealed the world of entrepreneurship to me and the world of startups and how fascinating it is and the kind of like challenges they had around product, around go-to-market, around uncertainty. And that's how I kind of like got enchanted and got into this world of startups. So I would say in the past decade, I probably built in one capacity or another, probably built a dozen products at the very least, maybe even more. Some of them were kind of like, entirely bootstrap. Most of them, honestly, were a complete failure. I think, that's part of the process. Some of them were more successful. A couple of them were actually, have came to become profitable businesses that are still active, and they generate revenue. They have a lot of happy users, and I'm very proud. But I think it's all part of the journey, kind of like being
Right.
able to fail and learn from your mistake, and kind of like not repeat the same mistake twice
Right.
and improve as an entrepreneur over time. So previously, I built Book Authority, which is basically a recommendation website for books, if you will. It's like Goodreads, but we base our recommendations based on experts, like people like Elon Musk, people like Jeff Bezos, recommending books, and we highlight the most recommended books on our platform. That's Book Authority. It has quite a lot of traction. I think almost 1 million users a month.
Wow.
A lot of recommendations, a lot of books sold. That's a great example of like dog fooding, because I set out to build Book Authority to solve my own problem. I was looking for great books to read, and I was sifting through like articles on Forbes and Inc. Eventually, I couldn't find the most recommended book, so I ended up like building this database
I love
that
it.
came to be Book Authority.
I just love it. That type of stuff inspires me, just like what you did with the PCR for the car. My father, who's at Google, he never had time to listen to articles, and he had a pipeline of hundreds, if not thousands, of articles. And he said, "Why can't the phone read those out to me with push of a button or with the assistant?" So he developed an app within Google that is now used by a lot of people around the world that reads articles for busy people as they're driving, as if it's a podcast. But I digress. But that is the exact type of entrepreneurship and innovation that really inspires me. Tell me a little bit about Wikiwand and Darkness, because those are also two fascinating ventures that I'd love to learn more about.
Yeah, so Darkness is an interesting example of I would say a gap in the market. So nowadays you would notice like, today, a lot of websites and apps offer dark themes. So you would have it like, on YouTube, and you would have it in Facebook more recently. And now I think, you have it in Google in beta, basically, or search base in a dark theme. But I started Darkness, a few years ago. And at this time, I knew how much I love dark themes. And then kind of like, from my other products, I kind of realized a lot of other people around the world love the concept of like browsing a website with dark themes. People, sometimes they're like night owls. They like working at night. A bright screen is like very glaring. It's not fun to use. And also you have this coolness factor about like working with a dark theme. So I decided to build Darkness. Darkness is an extension for Chrome that allows you to transform, I think about like 20 websites to be dark themed. And we support like Google, Facebook, YouTube, like many other websites. And we had quite a lot of success. We were actually featured in Chrome Web Store. We got a lot of downloads. The product itself is kind of dual in that like it is an open source product, so you can use the open source version, download it for free, get like all the features, get it installed on your computer, or you can download it from Chrome Web Store, where it's a freemium product in a way, where you have the basic feature set. But if you want to get like the full possibility, basically get access to like 20 different websites, 7 different themes, you pay. Basically, that's like a micro payment. We don't charge $99 an hour for a Chrome extension, obviously. But the nice thing about it is that we had, tens of thousands of paying customers for
Wow.
Darkness. So it has become quite a success. And I think it's a good example of sometimes you can find a real gap in the market in something that is like very niche. Like it would never become $1 billion company, obviously. But I ended up like solving my own problem, and on the way solving the problem for hundreds of thousands of other people around the world.
Unbelievable.
Which is great.
I remember when one of the developers, and I was also at 8200, and I remember the day that one of our developers, his name is Gilad, he brought into the unit a dark theme for a lot of the applications. And I remember everybody was going crazy. For some reason, engineers and developers love dark themes. And now it's actually become a common. I think that iOS launched their dark themes recently, but I can see that. I love the idea of solving your own problems again. And what about WikiOne? What is that about?
So WikiOne, I started WikiOne back in, it was 2013. I started it with Sal Wilf, which is an amazing serial investor, one of the best angel investors in Israel, I think. And the idea behind WikiOne was that, again, there is this huge gap in the market. So you have Wikipedia. Wikipedia is one of the top 10 websites on the internet in terms of like usage. You have like hundreds of like tens of billions of users using Wikipedia all the time. And the funny thing about Wikipedia is that it's so frequently used, but it is a product that hasn't evolved for the past decade. It hasn't evolved at all in terms of like the user experience, the usability, the feature set. It's still the same old Wikipedia. And we're all like very frustrated by that. So we decided to basically rebuild Wikipedia for the modern user.
Right.
So like you would get the same content that you get on Wikipedia, but with better readability, with better search, better discovery, power features, customizability. One of the things we had early on, it wasn't that popular back in the days, but we had a dark theme. So you could customize your interface and select a dark theme for WikiOne. And we ended up growing really fast. WikiOne, we ended up winning the 2015 Webby Award for the best user experience on the internet. Yeah, the Webby Award. And yeah, this is like thanks to the amazing team. Like we have Sar and Ilan and Tomer, a designer. Like, you know, the team, we're all a small team, kind of like doing amazing work around like building this product. It has become a huge success. We have over 10 million people using WikiOne every month right now. It's a profitable business. It's a pleasure to use. Honestly, you know, more that I'm proud, like, you know, proud with the traction. I'm proud that, you know, it's a product that I enjoy use, and we know so many people enjoy using WikiOne.
Wow, Lior, we'll get to the Y Combinator experience and Openbase and how you're solving a pretty big problem for developers with so many open source opportunities. But I have to gauge your passion for solving problems with products. Sometimes they're niche, sometimes they're not so niche. But what is it about solving problems with great people that really gets you excited? Because you've done it so much, you've been successful in almost all of them, which is incredible. But what do you do? Why do you do that? Why not just go start a $1 billion company 10 years ago?
I think it's about, like, in a way, it's a lot about the journey of an entrepreneur. And I wouldn't say, you know, I build a lot of failures, and like there's always this, I would say, survivorship bias, where like you learn about the successes, but I could fill up an episode of an hour about like all the products that I built and were never successful. And I think it's important for other entrepreneurs to hear about it. Because it's not always like sunny and roses, and a lot of things that I've built were like downright failure, and some of them were like, you know, a mild success, and some of them like were a bigger success, and that's part of the journey. But I'm kind of like digressing. I think for me, building products or like creating is part of like my invocation. This is not a job. This is not even a hobby. I recall even when I was younger, before I got into, programming, before I got into entrepreneurship, before I had the skills, I always loved creating things, whether like, you know, drawing schemes or coming up with inventions and stuff like that. So for me, that's not even a choice. I think that's just the way I'm wired. I don't see myself doing anything else but creating, but building products.
I just love that. So Y Combinator, Openbase, solving a problem in the open source space. Before we even talk about Openbase, what is open source? What is open source, and why is it a growing field today?
So open source is kind of like an amazing phenomenon, I would say, in software development. So I've been developing software for a while, probably since I was 10. And software development, like, you know, 2 decades ago was very different from today. So 2 decades ago, if you were to develop a complicated, rich piece of software, you had to develop every little piece yourself.
Right.
And that means like you have a product, you have a tooltip, you have a dialogue that you want to display. You want to handle text manipulation. All of these, as a developer, as a company, you had to develop yourself. And the open source movement was kind of revolutionary in that other developers around the world started working collaboratively with other developers and sharing their source code, what they've built with other developers. So now as a developer, you can tap to the collective knowledge, collective power of millions of other developers around the world. And when you build software nowadays, actually the statistics are astounding. So more than 50% of a modern app, modern product, modern website is comprised of open source code. And less than 50% is actually built by that like person or company. So I think the wonderful thing about open source is that it allows company to focus on their core competency, on their product, while utilizing the collective power of open source, so they don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Right.
They don't have to keep like building this dialogue and this text parsing and this those accounting functions, because other people have done this. So in a way, they're standing on the shoulders of giants.
Right. No, that makes a lot of sense. So, what is the opportunity that you realize in that gap? Because as a developer, when I read I'm actually surprised that it's not more than 50%. Because when I go into create an application, if it's a relatively simple application, I think maybe 80% of the code that I end up having is importing a code that much smarter and more intelligent engineers built. But what is the gap that you found in the market that led you to start Openbase and have that great opportunity?
So I found myself and developers around me spending so much time researching and evaluating open source packages. And the thing is, it wasn't an issue a decade ago because you only had a couple of packages to do every task. Whereas like today, if you look at the JavaScript ecosystem, you have almost 1.5 million packages to choose from. And that is basically a jungle. It's very hard to choose the right package. And even if you know specifically what you're looking for a specific task to accomplish, you have hundreds of competing packages to choose from. And this begs the question, like, how do you choose the right one? So I was spending significant amount of time each and every time I was looking for an open source component. And then speaking to other developers, I found that I'm not the only crazy one. In general, developers spend a lot of time sifting through packages and trying to find the best one for them.
Right.
And that's why I set out to build Openbase. That was May of 2019, last year. And it's been quite a wild ride since then. Yeah,
I can't even imagine. In a few sentences, tell me about the Y Combinator experience, because that by itself is one of the most sought after experiences of any entrepreneur.
Yeah, so the Y Combinator experience has been amazing. So we were actually the summer 2020 batch of Y Combinator. That has been the first fully remote batch of YC. I think the amazing thing about it was seeing so many international founders from all around the world. Entrepreneurs are entrepreneurs, like the same people kind of struggle with the same problems, trying to achieve the same objectives. So this was an amazing experience. We had an amazing set of partners in YC, so help walk us through some of the growing challenges of Openbase. I think they managed to pull off something like this. This was the first remote batch, and they managed to execute it so well. Starting from the office hours and the day-to-day, right, and the kind of people they kind of brought on to talk to the startups, and the demo day itself. Demo day, was quite a feat because you have so many startups pitching thousands of investors live on Zoom. Getting all of that to work flawlessly, that is quite a feat. So this has been once in a lifetime experience, that's for sure.
I can't even imagine. What are some, perhaps, your 2 cents from that great summer that you would take with you moving forward, or advice that you would give to young entrepreneurs?
So I think, I maybe paradoxically, my biggest advice or like takeaway from YC is, for example, I was speaking with some, YC partners. I was speaking with one partner and getting this advice, and I was speaking to the other partner and getting this other advice. And both of them are like, super qualified, highly successful entrepreneurs with a lot of experience that has seen like, hundreds of startups. So my advice would be take any advice with a grain of salt, because I think the further you go down the rabbit hole of like building a startup, the more specific your startup becomes. So you need to take any advice within the right context. And I think, generic advices are great when you get started, but the more you go in, the more you have baggage, the more you have specific circumstances, you would need a very specific advice. So what I did is kind of I utilized the advice to give me perspective. And it was always like great, because that was like a fresh perspective or like a way of seeing things that I've never thought about before. But it doesn't mean that I take this advice at par value. It doesn't mean that like, this person tells me, yeah, I think that this could work, this couldn't. I'm not taking it at par value, but rather I'm synthesizing all the data that I get. I sort of like build the map of the full gamut of all the possibilities of the things that I can do. And I think this is something that Wasi was really useful at it, kind of like showing the full gamut of things that you can do at each stage. But then as the CEO, it's my own responsibility to come up with a choice. You cannot outsource your choices and your decisions to someone else that gives you advice.
100%. Lior, I want to thank you for being so generous with your time. This was great. Before we leave, I have to ask you the most important question, which is 3 words that you would use to describe yourself.
Wow. So that's a great question. I would say first is I would say I'm ambitious. So I've always been, and I think, it's part of the thrill for me to pursue big goals. The other thing is resourceful, because I'm always like, even through like tough times, even when things are hard, I'm trying to find the right path moving forward instead of like regretting or looking back.
Right.
And I think that's like a very helpful thing as an entrepreneur. And the last but not least, I would say creator, because that's my passion, that's my invocation. That's what I love doing. I love creating.
Lior, this was great. Thank you very much. Thank you for the inspiration. Best of luck with Openbase. I can't wait to use it myself as an engineer. But thank you very much, and stay safe and stay healthy.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Of course.